Welcome back for chapter 7. We're now going to read about Roald Dahl's time about going to Norway. So, the summer holidays, those magical words, the mere mention of them used to send shivers of joy rippling over my skin. All my summer holidays from when I was 4 years old to when I was 17, 1920 to 1932, were totally idyllic. This, I'm certain, was because we always went on the same idyllic place, and that place was Norway. Except for my ancient half-sister, my not quite so ancient half-brother, the rest of us were all pure Norwegian, by blood. We all spoke Norwegian, and all our relations lived over there. So in a way, going to Norway every summer was like going home. Even the journey was an event. Do not forget that there were no commercial aeroplanes in those times, so it took us 4 whole days to complete the trip out and another 4 days to come home again. We were always an enormous party. There were my 3 sisters, my ancient half-sister, that's 4, my half-brother, and me, that's 6, and my mother, that's 7, and my nan, that's 8. And in addition to these, there were never less than 2 others who were some sort of anonymous ancient friends of the ancient half-sister. That's 10 altogether. Now, looking back on it, I don't know how my mother did it. There were all those train bookings and boat bookings and hotel bookings to be made in advance by letter. She had to make sure we had enough shorts and shirts and sweaters and gym soles and bathing costumes. You couldn't even buy a shoelace on the island we were going to. And the packing must have been a nightmare. Huge 6 trunks were carefully packed, as well as countless suitcases. And when the great departure day arrived, the 10 of us, together with our mountains of luggage, would set out on the first and easiest step of the journey, the train to London. When we arrived in London, we tumbled into 3 taxis and went clattering across the great city to King's Cross, where we got on the train for Newcastle, nearly 300 miles to the north. The trip to Newcastle took about 5 hours, and when we arrived there, we needed 3 more taxis to take us from the station to the docks, where our boat would be waiting. The next stop after that would be Oslo, the capital of Norway. When I was young, the capital of Norway was not called Oslo, it was called Christiania. But somewhere along the line, the Norwegians decided to do away with that pretty name and call it Oslo instead. As children, we all knew it as Christina, but if I call it that here, we shall only get confused, so I had better stick to Oslo all the way through. The sea journey from Newcastle to Oslo took 2 days and a night, and if it was rough, as it often was, we all got seasick except our dauntless mother. We used to lie in deck chairs on the promenade deck, within easy reach of the rails, emballed in rugs, our faces slate grey and our stomachs churning, refusing the hot soup and the ship's biscuits the kindly steward kept offering us. As for our poor Nanny, she began to feel sick the moment she stepped foot on deck. "I hate these things," she used to say. "I'm sure we'll never get there. Which lifeboat do you think we go to when it starts to sink?" Then she retired to her cabin, where she stayed groaning and trembling until the ship was firmly tied up at the quayside in Oslo harbour the next day. We all stopped off for one night in Oslo so that we could have a grand annual family reunion with Brette's mama and Brette's papa, our mother's parents, and with her 2 maiden sisters, our aunts, who lived in the same house. When we got off the boat, we all went in a cavalcade of taxis straight to the Grand Hotel, where we would sleep one night to drop off our luggage. Then, keeping in the same taxis, we drove on to our grandparents' house, where an emotional welcome awaited us. All of us were embraced and kissed many times, and tears flowed down wrinkled old cheeks, and suddenly that quiet, gloomy house came alive with many children's voices. Ever since I first saw her, Brette's mama was terrifically ancient. She was a white-haired, wrinkly-faced old bird who seemed always to be sitting in her rocking chair, rocking away and smiling benignly at the vast influx of grandchildren who barged in from miles away to take over her house for a few hours every year. Bretti's papa was the quiet one. He was a small, dignified scholar with a white goatee beard, and as far as I could gather, he was an astrologer, a meteorologist, and a speaker of ancient Greek. Like Bretti's mama, he sat most of the time quietly in a chair, saying very little and totally overwhelmed, I imagine, by the raucous rabble who were destroying his neat and polished home. The two things I remember most about Bretti's papa were that he wore black boots and he smoked an extraordinary pipe. The bowl of his pipe was made of meerschaum clay and had a flexible stem about 3 feet long, so that the bowl rested on his lap. All the grown-ups, including Nanny, and all the children, even when the youngest was only a year old, sat down around the big oval dining table on the afternoon of our arrival for the great annual celebration feast with the grandparents. And the food we received never varied. This was a Norwegian household, and for the Norwegians, the best food in the world is fish. And when they say fish, they don't mean the sort of thing you and I get from a fishmonger. They mean fresh fish. Fish that has been caught no more than 24 hours before and has never been frozen or chilled on a block of ice. I agree with them that that is the proper way to prepare fish like this, is to poach it. And that is what they do with the finest specimens. And Norway, by the way, Norwegians, always eat the skin of a boiled fish, which they say has the best taste of all. So naturally, this great celebration feast started with fish, a massive fish, a flounder as big as a tea tray and as thick as your arm, was brought to the table. It had nearly black skin on top, which was covered with brilliant orange spots, and it had of course been perfectly poached. Large white hunks of this fish were carved out and put into our plates, and with it we had hollandaise sauce and boiled new potatoes. Nothing else, and gosh, it was delicious. As soon as the remains of the fish had been cleared away, a tremendous claggy mountain of homemade ice cream would be carried in. Apart from the creamiest ice cream in the world, the flavour was unforgettable. There were thousands of little chips of crisp burnt toffee mixed into it. The Norwegian called it krokan. And as a result, it didn't simply melt in your mouth like ordinary ice cream. You chewed it and it went crunch, and the taste was something you dreamed about for days afterwards. This great feast would be interrupted by a small speech of welcome from my grandfather, and the grown-ups would raise their long-stemmed wine glasses and say skål many times throughout the meal. When the guzzling was over, those who were considered old enough were given small glasses of homemade liqueur, a colourless but fiery drink that smelled of mulberries. The glasses were raised again and again, and the scarling seemed to go on forever. In Norway, you may select any individual around the table and skål him or her in the small private ceremony. You first lift your glass high and say out the name, Bretti's mamma, you say, skål Bretti's mamma. She will then lift her own glass and hold it up high. At the same time, your own eyes meet hers as you sip your drink. After you have both done this, you raise your glasses high up again, and in a sort of silent final salute, and only then does each person look away and set down his glass. It is a serious and solemn ceremony, and as a rule, on formal occasions, everyone skåls everyone else around the table once. If there are, for example, 10 people present and you are one of them, you will skål your 9 companions, one each individually, and you yourself will also receive 9 separate skåls at different times during the meal, 18 in all. That's how they work in polite society over here, and at least they used to in the old days. And quite a business it was. By the time I was 10, I would be permitted to take part in these ceremonies, and I always finished up as tipsy as a lord. So, join me next time to read about the magic island.